It's Monday, and that means another City Skylines 2 developer diary and feature highlight video have been released, and this time the topic is traffic AI. And I know for myself, and likely for many of you, this is one of the more exciting topics, considering that the traffic AI impacts literally every part of the game, and in my opinion, could either make or break it. And this week's diary and feature highlight video were exciting not only because it confirmed improvements to the game's core logic, but also game performance improvements, which is something that many of us have wanted, and it provided hints at the incorporation of mechanics from 2 DLCs into the base game. In today's video, we're going to be deep diving into the diary, and then I'll highlight a few interesting things you may have missed from the feature highlight video. The diary begins by highlighting the differences between the way that City Skylines 1 and 2 handle traffic. The most basic level, City Skylines 1, assigned trips based on straight line distances or as the crow fly distances without taking into account your transportation network at all. Once a trip is assigned, the fastest route would be determined, and the sim would not change this route unless the route was no longer viable, such as if the road was blocked by a disaster or deleted. And this is why you often see your sims patiently waiting 100 cars deep in a single lane on a multi-lane road. This is also why, in my estimation, City Skylines 1 has the 9 tile limit. In a very small or a very dense city, this sort of pathfinding wouldn't be an issue. In a sprawling city, such as one that uses the 81 tiles mod, or a city where highways or rail lines sever connectivity, this kind of routing can lead to massive issues, such as your city services not being rendered in a timely way and your city breaking down. City Skylines 2, on the other hand, does take into account the transportation network that you've created when it determines routing, and those paths and routes can dynamically change as network conditions change or routes become blocked. In City Skylines 2, routing is determined based on what the developers are calling pathfinding costs. The pathfinding cost is based on 4 factors: the travel time, so the overall length of the trip, the comfort of the trip, which is the ease of travel along the route, and the difficulty in completing the trip, such as finding parking or transit stops near your destination, the cost of the travel, so the cost of the fuel, parking, and the transit tickets, and behavior. Some people are going to be willing to make more dangerous maneuvers on the road to cut down the overall trip time. These factors are then weighted by the age of the sim, and I really love this. I love taking demographics into account. So teens will opt for cheapest travel options since they don't have a lot of money. Adults will value their time above all else and will choose their routing based on shortest trip time. And seniors will prefer a comfortable route above all else, so they want parking at their destination or a transit stop right in front of it. So these factors will actually help determine a sim's travel preferences and the mode that they will use for their trip. In general, these categories sound pretty good to me, and I love the approach of using a modifier based on demographics. 2 of the factors, travel time and trip cost, are actually used by real planners when measuring transportation network efficiency and planning new transportation networks. There's only one major real-world factor that's missed, and that's variability. And what this means is the difference a trip can take from one day to the next. A route with high variability can be more frustrating to travelers than one that is predictably congested, and as a result, it can strongly influence people's routing decisions. It seems like this could have been worked into the game, considering we have a time of day mechanic and a day of the week mechanic, but I do understand why this was skipped, considering it would have added a lot of complexity to the simulation. Service vehicles are ordered based on the lowest overall pathfinding cost and can link trips when appropriate. And for cargo, profit margins are the key consideration, and shippers will attempt to keep the cargo as close as possible to improve profit margins. This to me feels like a direct response to City Skylines 1, where you would have an industry and sometimes you would ship out the raw material rather than processing it even if you had a need. I think this is probably going to improve the gameplay, even if it's not always the most realistic, and I'm here for it. Next, the diary discusses lane usage and confirms a feature that I know that many of us wanted. In City Skylines 2, vehicles will use more lanes. This sounds really basic, but in City Skylines 1, those queues of cars in a single lane on a multi-lane road drove me crazy, and I know they drove most of you crazy as well. In City Skylines 2, if a lane is blocked, a sim will choose a different lane. They can also choose to pass slower vehicles in those other lanes and will attempt to give room to emergency vehicles. And this is amazing, assuming that it works well. And I say this because I could see vehicles switching lanes and then missing their turns, which could lead to additional travel time and a bunch of unnecessary circulation. This does happen in real life, but things don't head south as quickly in real life as they do in the game. And if this were happening with service vehicles, for instance, it could be really catastrophic. I assume that's not a problem, but it's something that I'm going to keep an eye out for. But in general, I think that this is really welcome news. Next is simulation and performance, and this is one of the most exciting sections in the entire document, in my opinion, especially for people like me who like to build a big sprawling region and build it over a long period of time. So citizens will now take into account other citizens and other agents as they navigate through the city. So that means that the simulation is much more complex, the calculations are much more in depth, but the developers claim that the simulation is more efficient, resulting in higher performance, and has the ability to take advantage of multi-core CPUs. And to that, I say challenge accepted. I have a Ryzen 9 7950X3D processor. It has 16 cores, and I can't wait to see how it handles this game. And then for longevity of a city, hard limits for agents have been removed, and they claim that the only limitations for the simulation are your hardware. There's a couple of things here that kind of made my spidey senses tingle. They talked about the hard limits for agents being removed, but didn't say anything about hard limits for buildings, for instance, or nodes. This also makes me curious how the game will perform on different console hardware, such as the Xbox Series S versus the Xbox Series X. Theoretically, the Xbox Series X could grow a larger city. This is something we'll have to keep an eye on. But in general, I couldn't be more happy to hear that we're going to be able to harness all the power of our CPUs and that the simulation will be a little bit more intelligent. The Sims will be working together to navigate the city. The next topic is roundabout behavior, and the previous developer diary talked about the presence of roundabouts in the game, and this one confirms that they will work well. And the reason they'll work well is that the traffic simulation will actually take the rules of a roundabout into account, which is a huge improvement from City Skylines 1. That means that vehicles within the roundabout will have the right of way to vehicles entering it. Previously, this was only possible if you had Traffic Manager and you set up the roundabout appropriately. This will just be the default option in City Skylines 2. However, similar to in real life, individual Sims can decide to break the rules a little bit and maybe enter a roundabout when they shouldn't, and that's a really interesting mechanic, and I'm interested in seeing how that works. The one thing I am curious about is how roundabouts will work with crashes. One of the main reasons that roundabouts are becoming so prevalent is that the crash severity and the number of crashes at a roundabout pales in comparison to signalized intersections. So ideally, adding roundabouts would reduce the number of crashes in your city, and I really hope that's part of it. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. Just generally, I'm really happy to hear that roundabouts are going to work appropriately. They're really an important tool in a traffic management arsenal, and I think I'm going to employ them all over the place. Speaking of crashes, the next topic is accidents. The previous developer diary confirmed that accidents are in the game, and this one confirms the way that they will work. The likelihood of a crash is calculated on a per road segment, so road conditions, lighting, weather, and disasters will all play into the likelihood of a crash on a particular road segment. And you heard me right, disasters are in the game. Random Sims and agents that go across these segments will be selected to lose control, and at that time they will gain physics. So they'll be able to hit buildings and flip over and have all sorts of pandemonium occur. For all crashes, the police department and road maintenance department will need to come up to clear the incident. In cases where there are serious injuries, ambulances may also be needed. When this occurs, Sims will either drive around the accident or queue up behind it. And depending on how long it takes to clear it, they might just whip a U-turn and find a new path. And the more that I hear about this game mechanic, the more excited I am for it. I think it's going to add that variability I was talking about earlier and make managing traffic in your city a little bit more complicated. All that said, I hope that this is not overdone. I hope that this isn't fire spreading like we see in City Skylines 1. But if it's done right, I think that this is going to make your city feel a lot more realistic. And I'm really excited that the road maintenance depot is now given a more prominent role in the game. That's the public works department, and they're really the unsung heroes of cities. They're the ones that are clearing the snow on a snowy day, making sure that the police and fire and ambulances can get to where they need to go. They also do fill potholes and clear incidents, and it's really exciting to see that this mechanic is being worked into the game. The next topic is parking, which is a topic that is really interesting to me on a personal level, and I'll discuss that in more detail in just a moment. But basically, parking availability will help determine pathfinding and the mode of transportation that someone takes to get to their destination. Generally, Sims will prefer to park close to their destination, and if parking is not available, they might choose a different mode of transportation, or they might change their destination altogether to one that does have parking. Individual parking lots can have different fees set for them, and that can influence who decides to park there based on their wealth level, which I think is a really interesting mechanic. And finally, there's been a confirmation that there are multiple different types of lots available in the game. Not just surface lots, we also have multi-story parking garages and underground parking structures. So you're gonna have a lot of variety there, and I really love to see it. So I mentioned that parking is a topic that is very interesting to me, and that is because I worked on transportation demand management, or TDM. And the purpose of transportation demand management is to encourage people to use other modes of transportation. And really the most effective tool in the TDM toolbox is parking policy and making parking a little less available. So that is charging for parking or reducing the number of parking stalls that are available. And this is something that cities all across the world are actively doing to try to encourage people to use other modes of transportation. So this mechanic makes it seem like TDM principles may actually apply in the game, and I can't wait to see if they actually do. The next topic is INFOVIEWS, and if you saw my previous video, this may seem to be a little bit of a rehash. We were able to actually see that the traffic overview includes flow and volume based on images that were already revealed. But we do have confirmation now that flow is how smoothly the traffic is moving and volume is how many vehicles are on a particular segment. And both of those views will be available to you through the traffic info view. There's also a new road info view, which will show you roadway condition, and that can impact the speed of a particular roadway segment and the likelihood of an accident on those segments. Before we move to the next topic, I just have to say it. These new maps in game are absolutely beautiful and I love the way they look. I do wonder about the functionality though. I want to be able to overlay traffic flow and volume. That would be really important. So I'm hoping that we can do this. I don't necessarily know that that is possible, and at least it hasn't been confirmed. But again, I love the way that these look in what information has been provided. The next topic is service vehicles, but this really covers a spectrum of different city services. First of all, service vehicles such as garbage trucks and road maintenance vehicles will service requests along the way to their destination. So let's say they're picking up garbage across town, they will pick up all the garbage along their route. Emergency vehicles, on the other hand, will make more risky driving maneuvers to shorten their routes on their way to their ultimate destination. So that means that ambulances might make U-turns in order to reduce their trip length. Police vehicles will patrol areas. However, if there's an emergency such as a crime or a traffic incident, they will abandon their patrol and go serve that incident. Then it says public transit vehicles will travel on their designated lines. And this is really interesting because it makes me wonder, so if there's a crash, will a bus just wait in the queue or will it choose a new route? And then we have confirmation that taxis are in the game, so that is a part of the After Dark DLC that has made its way into the base Cities Skylines 2. And it sounds like they're going to actually have a more interesting mechanic than in Cities Skylines 1. At the most basic level, taxis will operate like private vehicles and use those same 4 factors that we discussed earlier when determining their pathfinding. But we have confirmation that taxi depots will be upgradable. And at the base level, taxis can only pick up passengers at taxi stands, but if the depot is upgraded, they can pick up passengers anywhere in your city. So I feel like this is a little bit of a teaser, something we're going to learn more about in the future, and I'm really excited to hear it. And then finally, we have confirmation of a feature I was kind of surprised to see, but really happy to see in the game as well. And that is the ability to lock service vehicles to specific districts. This is the same functionality that you have if you use Transfer Controller in Cities Skylines 1, and it allows you to create multi-city regions, which is really exciting to hear, because now you'll be able to lock a police car to a specific city if that city is within a district. So I'm really excited to see this in the game, and it makes regional play much more viable. All in all, I think these are some really exciting updates, and they have the potential to change the way that you plan your cities and regions, so I'm really excited to see them. And then we have our final topic, traffic between cities. And this is probably the only topic that, in my opinion, is a bit of a bummer. It sounds like dummy traffic is still a thing, and like traffic between cities will function just as it does in Cities Skylines 1. The only addition that we have confirmation of is the ability to add outside connections without a mod. All of that said, I'm not sure whether you can only connect highways or not. You can't really tell from their images, and they haven't confirmed that you can connect, say, a 2-lane road to the outside world and have a connection. They did confirm that the dummy traffic does not contribute to your economy, but it can certainly impact your traffic flow. So I'm not sure how to feel about this one. I was really hoping that we could have some sort of regional connectivity that would have more value. And based on the utility stuff that we saw in the previous video, it made me think that those regional connections might be present. So I'm still a little bit unsure about how to feel about this one. I'm hoping we get more info about this feature in the future. Let's switch gears and take a look at the feature highlight video. And I'm not going to play through this video. The information is basically a rehash of what's in the developer diary with a little bit less information. But we do have some really interesting images here. And I think that we might be able to tell some new things about the game that we didn't know and just generally admire it. And that's what I want to do here. Look at how beautiful the city looks. I love the building models. I love the way that the roadway networks look. I love the landscaping. I love the fog. Just generally, the game looks outstanding. This is what you'd strive for in Cities Skylines 1, and it's what we get as our default and base in Cities Skylines 2. It's going to be amazing to see how much more this is elevated with mods. But honestly, I might be a player that sticks very close to vanilla if it looks like this, because this is amazing. The second shot that we see is a downtown area. And I'm going to start out with some good things. And here's the main one. So we've got different lighting effects by buildings. So these two buildings are exactly the same, and you can see that different lights are on in the buildings. And I really am excited to see that, because that means that there's more character and life in your cities. I am really excited to see that. I'm also excited to see that the billboards that are present are less cartoony. I do think that there are still too many of them, and we don't exactly have a ton of variety. This billboard, for instance, is the same as this one. So is this one and this one, but they do look a lot more attractive. And now I'm going to point out something that is worrying to me. Now, this is something that might just be because this is still in beta, and it might be something that is related to the time of day, which we can't tell in the game. But I'm noticing that there is not much in the way of traffic on these roads. In fact, the cars that we see right here, I believe those are parked vehicles. Now, the reason that I'm venturing to guess that is the road is darker there, and it seems like all the places where you have vehicular movement are lighter. So when you look at this, we just don't really see all that many cars on the road, and that's going to become a bit of a theme. Now, again, if this is 5 in the morning, maybe you just don't have that many vehicles out there, but I'm a little dubious on that, because you see a lot of pedestrian activity. That said, I have worked in game development, and I know that things can change rapidly near the release date, but that's something that has been kind of making my spidey senses tingle a bit. And I want to take a moment to pause on this image, because there's a lot to unpack here, but I think we have confirmation of a couple of things that people have been wondering about. First of all, this appears to be a key wall. It doesn't go all the way around, so maybe this is why people thought that key walls weren't in Cities Skylines 2. I've seen that in the comments so many times, but this appears to be a key wall. Next, just look at the water. This looks outstanding. It looks real. So it's absolutely beautiful. The reflections are great. And speaking of buildings, I'm super curious about what this is. Is it some sort of harbor? Whatever it is, it looks outstanding. And then this is really interesting to me down here. We actually have buildings underneath a bridge, which is something that wasn't really possible in Cities Skylines 1. This is road anarchy making its way into the base game tools. So it's going to be exciting to see how much flexibility we actually have with these, but it appears that we have quite a lot. Next, we have this shot right here, and I don't think what's interesting about this shot is the vehicle that it's following. I think it's actually some of the other things that we can see. First of all, the people look really good in this shot. I don't see a jumpsuit man wearing the gold jumpsuit that was in the last video, nor do I see Fight Club lady, but the people look very good for the most part. I do see a lot of people at this transit stop, which looks like some of the things you'd see in Cities Skylines 1, so it seems like that sort of bunching might occur again. Not the end of the world, but it's something that I guess I am aware of in this, and it's very interesting to me. And just as soon as I say that golden jumpsuit man is gone, there he is. This is our new Philip, and I hope he remains in the game. We also have Fedora Man over here, and very interested in learning more about Fedora Man. There's also a lot of motorcycles. It seems like every shot has at least one motorcycle, if not multiple. Next, I wanted to point out the way these railroad tracks are crossing the road. So we see 3 quick stops in rapid succession. It doesn't appear that they are linked, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it is cool that we can have so many of them in such a short distance. That would be an absolute monster in Cities Skylines 1. You'd have to have mods, so it's cool to see that in the game. And then finally, I wanted to know what this is. I've seen this in a couple of shots. I'm going to keep my eyes out for it. It might just be a beta bug, but it is certainly something that I'm curious about. Now, I have to pick on this image a little bit. This one cracked me up. First of all, we have a motorcycle without anyone driving it, so that is definitely a beta bug that'll likely be resolved. And then we have appears to be Heisenberg back here, wearing his fedora, no hat. Very interested to see if Walter White makes an appearance in the game. Now, this is the one definitive shot that we have of a significant amount of traffic in the city, and I'm very curious about this, if this was something that was kind of staged or if this was naturally occurring. In either instance, we are seeing that both lanes are filled, which is very exciting, and I'm happy to see that. It's absolutely amazing to see that. Next, we have this shot of another traffic jam, and this is another shot that is a little bit concerning to me. So we kind of see some of the same mechanics that we saw in City Skylines 1, where someone would stop traffic in the outside lane because it needed to switch all the way over. You kind of see that same thing where this vehicle is trying to cut all the way across. So I am curious to see how this mechanic works. The other thing I'm noticing is that the lane markings are outstanding in this. So this is a very complex interchange, and you see all of the lane markings looking absolutely beautiful. And I'm guessing that this is at multiple levels too, so to see it look that good at multiple levels is pretty impressive. Next, we have a couple of shots of parking lots, and what you see is that there's EV parking, which is pretty neat to see. And similar to real life, that EV parking is worked directly into a parking lot, a normal parking lot. There's EV parking available. One of the things I'm going to be interested in seeing is if you set the all EV policy, assuming it's in the game again, will you see more of these chargers all throughout the parking lot, or are they just what they are? And then on the topic of EV parking, we get this next shot, and I think the purpose of this shot is to show you that you can adjust the parking fees, and the parking fees will influence how many people use the lot. But I see all of these motorcycles parked in the EV parking, and it kind of just cracks me up. I do know that Harley-Davidson, a Wisconsin-based company, is creating electric motorcycles, so I guess it's not too far-fetched that we might see those at some point, but it still kind of cracked me up to see so many motorcycles parked in there. And on that note, there are, again, a lot of motorcycles in this shot, and it surprises me that there isn't dedicated motorcycle parking, because you'll often see that in dense urban areas because you can cram a lot of mopeds or motorcycles into one parking stall. So to see these taking up all that space is a little bit jarring to me. And I wanted to stop on this shot for a quick second. Two things that I think are worth pointing out here. First of all, the reflections on the glass of the bus are absolutely outstanding. It seems as though they're shimmering when this is playing. And then secondly, we see a building underneath this road, which is really exciting. It seems like we're gonna have a ton of flexibility. There's also a road underneath there. We are gonna have so much power in this game. Now in this shot, I want to point out something you might have missed. It looks like we have a radio mast here. And if you have the Natural Disasters DLC, you'll know that the radio masts the reason they're in the game is to broadcast information about disasters to your citizens. So I'm very interested in seeing if this mechanic is worked into the base game, knowing that disasters were confirmed, or what the purpose of this is. In this image, I just wanted to point out one thing quickly. We have a pedestrian path, and you can see that there's detail in the path, and it's not at all splotchy, and I am really excited to use these. It's one of my biggest complaints about City Skylines 1, and I know it's a minor, weird, random thing, but it's always bugged me. Now, I'm just going to point out that there are a number of hilarious things in this image. First of all, we've got a couple of dogs walking themselves. We've got a motorcycle walking itself. Another one back here walking itself as well. And then there's something that I find to be a little bit more interesting. We have rain in this, and I don't see any water effects. So I'm hoping that this is a beta limitation, or maybe someone had their graphics settings turned down. But in City Skylines 1, roads appear to get wet, as do other surfaces, and you're just not seeing it in City Skylines 2, at least in the B-roll that's been shown. And there's going to be a number of shots after this one where that is the case. It looks like I spoke too soon about Fight Club Lady. She's right here. She's still got her gloves on, and she's ready to get into a rumble. And then in this shot, a couple of interesting things. First of all, we have an ambulance that we're following. It is from the Disease Control Center. So we're gonna have multiple hospital options, and it looks like it's going to an art gallery, which is pretty interesting. It's raining here. Again, we don't have those water effects. And there, again, aren't many cars on the roads. This shot is taking place at about 2:39 in the afternoon. That is midday, and you would expect there to be traffic on the streets. This shot is interesting because it's demonstrating that physics engine that was mentioned in the developer diary. We see that there's a car here that's actually flipped on its side, and one here that looks like it's flat as a pancake. So I'm not sure what's going on there. It's probably just perspective, but you can see that the cars are being thrown around. I'm also very curious about this vehicle. Was this a vehicle that was involved in the crash? Is this a vehicle that is turning around? Is this a road maintenance vehicle? I'm not sure what the deal is with this one, but there's something curious about it to me anyway. And then I hate to keep harping on these things, but again, not very much traffic and no rain effects. I'm really hoping that both of those are beta things. And then we have this view of the parking facility availability in the info views. And this one's very interesting to me because I talked about TDM earlier, transportation demand management, and I'm really curious if you were to turn off half of these parking lots, what would happen to the city? Would people just abandon it and decide to go elsewhere? Or would people just start taking transit? So right now, I mean, the way that this is laid out, it looks like it's good that you've got a ton of excess parking. That is generally not what you want. You'd want to see the number of parked vehicles a little bit closer to this capacity. I would expect if you have this many parking stalls that you would actually be losing a ton of money, but it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out in the game. Next, we have this shot of a multi-tiered roadway system, which is really exciting to me. This would have been next to impossible in City Skylines 1. It's really nice to see that there's a lot more flexibility with pillars, but again, not a lot of traffic on these roads. Very curious about that. And then finally, we get this night shot, and just look at the lighting effects in the city. It is absolutely outstanding. The one thing I am curious about is, based on my read of the developer diary, it seems like you might be able to take lights off any road that you want, and maybe Colorado Springs it. Colorado Springs decided to try to save money by getting rid of streetlights. So I'm wondering if that is a possibility here. So if you have a suburban area, if you can get rid of the lights. Generally, it looks really, really good. And there we have it. A ton to be excited about with the new transportation AI. We've also got a number of things that were confirmed that we were unaware of before, like multi-core CPU support, the agent limit being removed, natural disasters being in the game, streetlights having a purpose, reducing the number of accidents, taxis being in the base game, the ability to upgrade some buildings like the taxi depot, the ability to limit services to a specific district, and the ability to create new outside connections when we want to. This did leave me with some concerns and questions though, and I'm hoping that those get resolved over the next series of videos. In particular, the lack of traffic in most of the B-roll. I'd like to see more information about how parking works and if it's a requirement or if it's something that we can do without and have more people taking public transit. The lack of certain environmental effects, particularly standing water, I'm curious to know if that is just a beta issue or if that is a thing. I'm a little surprised to see that speed limits weren't mentioned at all. I'm really hoping that we can change the speed limit of roads. I'm also curious to know if other hard limits in the game have been removed. Obviously, they mentioned that hard limits for agents have been removed. What about for nodes, buildings, trees, etc.? And I'm really interested in seeing how the INFOVIEWS handle services that are locked to a specific district. So if we can restrict these down, I want to know how police coverage is in a district, not community-wide. But overall, I'm really excited about the direction that they're taking the traffic AI in. It seems like this is going to be a lot smarter in terms of routing, more dynamic, and you won't have silly traffic jams. If you have a traffic jam, it's going to be your fault, and you'll actually be able to resolve it in a reasonable and realistic way. So it's going to make solving traffic issues in City Skylines 2 a ton more interesting in my mind than in City Skylines 1. And with that, I think we're going to leave it here, and I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider hitting the like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so, especially if you like videos like this, because I'll be releasing these deep dives every Monday until the game is released, and I really can't wait to see you in the next one. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care. Bye-bye.